All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, this is Rachel, and I'm with 365Ninja.com, and this is our very last session of our 365 Ninja Live webinar series. Last but not least, so as you can see on your screen here, we're going to be talking about adding over 3,000 cloud apps to Office 365 using Azure Active Directory. And before we jump into the presentation, I'm just a couple comments beforehand. So in your GoToWebinar panel here, you should see a questions section, and you're welcome to send questions. I'll be able to view those, and we'll do kind of a Q&A with our speaker at the end of the session. Those of you who have been in session so far kind of know the drill. So feel free, if it pops into your mind, go ahead and put it in the questions pane there, and or you can kind of wait till the end. And just a reminder, I am going to share the recording after the session, so if you have to step out or maybe you have a colleague or something that couldn't attend, don't worry, you'll be able to view the presentation later and you'll receive that link via email. Okay, so it is my pleasure to announce our speaker today, Norman di Pasquale. He is a Microsoft certified professional and he's got a ton of experience in the IT industry. Currently he's with Quartet Services, and he manages major Office 365 contracts there, and he's the lead innovator of new tools and practices. So that combined with his experience in cloud solutions and Office 365 migrations and support means that we're very lucky to have him guide us through this topic of adding cloud apps to Azure AD. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Norman, and we'll jump into the presentation.
Thank you, Rachel. It was a great introduction, and it's an honor to be a closer of the 365 Ninja webinar series. So yeah, as Rachel mentioned, I'm going to be presenting about adding over 3,000 cloud apps to your Office 365 using Azure Active Directory. I'm going to talk through how this is done, and then we're actually going to see a demonstration towards the end. So let's move on. So let's start with a little bit of a history lesson. Back in the year 2000, Microsoft was competing against Novell and Banyan Vines and other server solutions for dominance in the server market. Microsoft definitely started from behind with Novell having a massive lead in that area. But Microsoft discovered something that actually led them to win that server fight, which was that people didn't want to log on with a username and password first to their computer, then a different username and password to their file share, then a different username and password to their email. They wanted to have one login to rule them all. So Microsoft made this discovery, and in Windows Server 2000, that was the first implementation of what we know as single sign-on. And it was great. It was implemented perfectly, and from there on in, there was never a competitor in the server market that could get anywhere close to Microsoft. So with that said, a single sign-on to the cloud is really the new frontier. You know, when we think about all of the different applications we log into in the cloud, it might look a little something like this. You know, we all wish that we, or you know, some of us might wish that we could work completely in one vendor's cloud, but that just is not the case in the world that we're in today. You know, you might find yourself logging into 15 to 20 cloud applications each and every single day of your work life, and creating a spider web somewhat similar to this one. A solution to this problem is actually found and implemented through Azure Active Directory, which to define Azure Active Directory, it really is identity and access in the cloud and as well on-premise to some extent. The way that Azure Active Directory handles sign-on is the same logon that you use all the way down to your computer can manage all of your cloud apps as well. So once you're logged into your computer, you open your Office 365 portal and you get your applications. Single sign-on from on-premise all the way up to the cloud. So what can you do with Azure Active Directory? You can brand and personalize your Office 365 portal. This is a feature people love because when you go to your Office365.com login and enter your domain name, suddenly all of your corporate brand appears, your corporate colors, any special text that your company wants you to see. You know, it gives you confidence that you're actually logging into the right place, if nothing else. It also allows users to reset their own Office 365 passwords, which I know is a feature that's going to make a lot of admins out there smile. Especially as we get to, say, 200-300 users of Office 365, having people be able to self-service becomes key. As well as multi-factor authentication. So That means logging in both with a password that you know and then something that you have. So in this case, you'd log in with your password. It would do something like send a text to your cell phone. You would enter in that text, the numbers in the text that you got, and then you're logged in Office 365. And finally, the thing I'm going to focus on today, which is you're able to add over 3,000 cloud apps to your Office 365 portal. So what kind of cloud apps are we talking about? Here's an abbreviated list, which still feels pretty complete. Basically, any cloud application that you can think of that you log into on a daily basis can be attached into your Office 365 portal. You click on it, it jumps you right in, no bothering for another username and password. Single sign-in in the cloud. So what can you do with the cloud apps that you add in Azure Active Directory? You can either assign them to users or to groups. So an example that I like is, let's say you have a Twitter account that the entire marketing department uses. Well, you can add Twitter, you can create a marketing group, then assign Twitter to that marketing group, and then have the logon to the marketing Twitter account actually be managed by Azure Active Directory. So no one's the gatekeeper anymore for your marketing Twitter account. It's actually managed in the cloud by Azure, making life easy, I think, for the whole department. You can also allow Azure, well, as I was mentioning, you can manage the password in the cloud app. You can have multi-factor authentication to cloud apps that don't even support it. So you log into Twitter, then it sends a text to your cell phone. You have to enter the code in that text, and then you get into Twitter, just to enhance your security while out in the cloud. And you can also access your apps through an app from the App Store called My Apps, both on the Android or iOS. Some of the thinking behind this is instead of security being in the four walls around your office protecting your server, we're actually starting to put armor on people as they leave the castle and keep them protected wherever they have to work. Where can you find Azure Active Directory in Office 365? That's a very good question. It's actually there, but it's fairly buried, to be straightforward with you. You actually have to you do need to be logged in as a global admin. That is a must. And then when you click on admin, or this interface here that you're seeing is actually the new admin interface in Office 365, you'll see Azure Active Directory. Then it will, the initial setup of Azure Active Directory takes 5 minutes, but it's totally free. It's just a button you click on and it starts to provision for you. And I have to say, in my humble estimation, by far, it's the easiest part of Azure to work with. It's completely GUI and wizard driven. This was built so that end users could sort of self-service their cloud apps that they need to use. So it had to be built in a really friendly GUI, and well, they did it. At this point, we're going to try to see a demo. Here we go. Going to go over to the Office365.com website. So when I go to Office365.com, because it remembers me as a Quartet service employee, you can see how all the company branding has appeared, both on the left side where the gigantic picture usually is, as well as the banner, and then text at the bottom saying this page is meant for employees of Quartet. So this is an example of the branding. We'll click on Sign In. As I was saying, Azure Active Directory is fairly buried when you log in, even as a global administrator. So we go to Admin, we expand that tab. Let's put that, there it is. And we click on Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. The first time you click on this, it's going to take about 5 minutes to provision, but then you'll be ready to roll and you'll see the screen that we're about to see in a moment. Coming along, there we are. I feel like this is kind of a gentle introduction to Azure because trying to configure networking or VPN or virtual machines, even in Azure, can be complicated. So we click on the company name here. We go to Applications. And from here, we'll see all of the applications that have already been provisioned through Azure Active Directory. You'll see some built-in ones that Office 365 creates whenever you start a new Office 365 tenant. And this gives us the hint that Azure Active Directory is actually the back end of Office 365, which it is. Let's go to Add an Application. going to add an application from the gallery in this case, but you can also add applications that you've developed. Here we go. And you know, it's kind of interesting to try to stump this. There are over 2,500 apps in here, and almost just about any cloud app that's out there that you can log into with username and password can be added to this. So that's how we get over the 3,000. So just going to type Skype for an example here. There's Skype. Let's check that off. Okay, I'm going to click on this to just permit people to actually use this and put their credentials into it. I'm going to go with a password single sign-on, so the first time I do click on Skype, it will ask me for my username and password, but going forward after that, it will remember it. And then I'm going to assign, this is an optional step, but I'm going to assign it to a group called the Skype group. And I'm going to specify here, I want to enter the credentials to be shared among everybody in the group. So if we had, say, a corporate Skype account, I could assign the Skype app to anybody in the group that uses the corporate Skype account, and they won't need to know the username and password. It'll be cached and remembered for them. Single sign-on. You'll see when Azure's working, you'll see little notifications at the bottom. This thing is fast like grease lightning, really. Everything it does very quickly. So that's good. And let's just okay, that's great. I'm just going to go back to groups and add myself to that Skype group. I notice there's 2 Skype groups, so I'm just going to cheat and add myself to both. Okay, there we go. And now for the best part. So that's all done. We're going to hop into, we're going to go back to the Office 365 portal. And here's a listing of all the apps that I have available to me. Just going to hop into one that's been, and Skype just appeared before our very eyes. Let's just test that. With any luck, I got the right credentials. Otherwise, I'll show you Twitter in a second. Let's give Twitter a shot. So bang, I clicked on Twitter and I'm right in my Twitter account. So this is great, again, when you have, let's say, a corporate Twitter account that multiple people use and you don't want the person who remembers username and password to walk out the door one day. It's completely stored and cached and remembered by Office 365. So this is how single sign-on and then assignment of the apps to groups can work. I think that will be the end of the demo. So Azure Active Directory, there's a free version that comes with Office 365, and it allows you to assign up to 10 cloud applications to each end user in Office 365. There is, of course, an Azure Active Directory Premium, which you can get through the Enterprise Mobility Suite. And this allows you to assign an unlimited amount of apps to users, as well as allows them to reset their own passwords and do self-service even on apps. And other features such as multi-factor authentication. You can get this as part of the Enterprise Mobility Suite, a whole bunch of different Microsoft apps aimed at adding armor to people when they walk out of the 4 walls of your castle for a bundled price of $7.60 a month. When you factor in even the new software they've thrown in there, the value is about over $15 per user per month in value. At this point, I'll thank everybody very much for their time, and I hope that demonstration was useful, made some sense, and would like to turn it over to Rachel to see if there's any questions.
Sure. So I've got a couple questions, and for those
Great.
of you who are in the audience, feel free to keep asking questions while we're talking. So first question is, do you have any recommendations for admins when adding the cloud apps and kind of rolling them out to their end users? Is this anything that end users need training for, or do they just, is it just kind of they see it and then they start using it immediately?
Yeah, so when you add an app and you provision it to a group, particularly if you're talking about a larger company, the user will actually notice it in their list of apps in Office 365. It will just appear there. So if they are working through the Office 365 portal, it is a seamless experience that requires very little, if any, training. I mean, you see the app, you click on it, you're jumped in, logged in as the person you're supposed to be. So very little training would be my answer.
Cool. And so this question, can you say more about the admin portal for Office 365? And I think that means just kind of the general admin portal compared to admin for Azure AD.
Well, you know, these are two different worlds in a way. It's people who have played with things like Azure virtual machines or virtual private networks and things like this. They are sort of wizard-driven, but certainly more complicated than the Office 365 portal. To me, the Office 365 portal, especially they're previewing a new admin portal that's going to make life even easier for Office 365 admins. It's simplicity itself. And the nice thing about Azure AD is it kind of carried forward that simplicity, while other parts of Azure are certainly not that simple.
Yeah. All right, this is a good question, in my opinion. I'm curious about this as well. Where and how does Azure AD store the password for those external apps?
So the passwords are stored in sort of a password hash that they maintain. These things are actually stored in Microsoft's cloud and are just as secure as the rest of Microsoft's cloud. They haven't had a hack yet, knock on wood.
Right, yeah. And we've heard security has been kind of a theme throughout all of these presentations, so
I have to say, having your Twitter login, let's say, on a sticky note on a monitor is significantly worse than storing it hyper securely in Microsoft's cloud. They have a new site called the Trust Center where they can talk about the various levels of security they employ, and it's very impressive.
Yes. All right, we have a question from somebody in education who asks, does this support learning apps like Moodle? Or like learning management systems, I think.
I saw another one called Concur that a math school was using, and that was right in there, and we've already provisioned it for them in their Office 365 tenant. You know, our company can certainly help with anything like that. The other neat thing is if it's a cloud app and it has a username and password, that is all your criteria. You can add custom applications in here as long as there's a site that you go to and a place where the username and password gets entered. It can be kept in Azure Active Directory.
Great. And we had a question, let's stay in the education realm actually first. In education, do you know if they have to acquire the premium version of Azure AD?
Now, I'll be clear about the presentation. A lot of what actually basically everything I demonstrated there can be done on the free package.
Right, and that's what I wasn't sure about. I know the education plans differ sometimes.
Well, that's true, they do. Now, the enterprise even the Azure Active Directory Premium would be significantly cheaper for education. But, you know, the place I would always start is probably to try a pilot within the free environment and see how well it works for your users, and then, you know, take the discussion from there.
Right, right.
Free's a good price.
Yes, yes, indeed. All right, so we had a couple questions kind of around this same area. Does this work the same way, basically the process that you demoed, if they're using ADFS for authentication?
Yes. In fact, things can be even more seamless in an ADFS environment. You know, like for instance, usually under an ADFS environment, when you go to log in Office 365, you log right in. You don't even need to enter a password at that window. And then from there, you know, you can click on any of the cloud apps, any of the Office apps, and work right away. I mean, from there, you're getting true single sign-on. You're logging to your computer, controls Office 365, all of your local stuff, and all of your cloud apps. One login to rule them all.
Another question, this is something I was actually curious about as well. So you can install these third-party cloud apps, of course, but you also mentioned if you build your own. So if you do build your own, what's the process of like submitting that app for inclusion? Well, I guess two questions. If you build your own, how do you add it to your tenant? And also, if you build your own, what's the process of submitting it, I guess, to that gallery for anyone to include?
Yeah, so there's actually just an email into the Azure team if you want to publish your application in the gallery. For those who are opening up their application to the world, that's great. Now, if you've built a corporate application you don't want to have open up to the world, that might not be the process. You'll go to add the application and then add an application my organization is developing. And from there, let's say it's a PHP website, for instance, that you have that has Active Directory credentials, there is a clearly mapped out process to link that to the Azure Active Directory and then to your Office 365 portal.
Got it. And then I think this question you went into a bit when you were talking about the different plans and whether or not you have Enterprise Mobility Suite and things like that. But can you just reiterate, is there a limit of cloud apps that we can get with Azure AD?
Azure AD Premium has no limit at all. Free is limited to 10 single sign-on apps per user. But that might mean one person has 10 apps, then another person has a completely different 10 apps, and that's still totally fine even under the free package. So with Premium, though, there simply is no limit. You can add apps till the cows come home.
Right, and that makes me wonder if there is or if there should be best practices around how many apps an admin should add. If they have Azure AD Premium and there's an unlimited number of apps, at what point does it become unmanageable? Which might depend on the organization, I guess.
Yeah, and these should be apps that add business value. I mean, I see Netflix in the portal. I'm not sure that should be added to your Office 365 portal.
Unless your business is watching movies, I guess.
Right. If you're a movie reviewer, that could make a ton of sense, but otherwise, not so much. So, just think through the apps. These should be apps that your business users use every day. Because if you're adding apps that don't add value, then you're just wasting everybody's time.
Right. All right, let's see. We have plenty of time for more questions, so let me know if you have any more in the question panel here. And we kind of touched on security concerns, I guess, when we talked about password, but when you're adding these non-Microsoft apps, are there any major security concerns or any preparations that need to be made or restrictions that should be in place with bearing in mind security?
Security, let's see here. So, you do want to be careful. You're obviously going to want to map out what kind of groups you have in your company, like the marketing, let's say marketing accesses Twitter, LinkedIn, and Skype, for instance. Then, you make the marketing group, then you assign those apps, and then you assign them out to users. I would publish applications in this manner rather than just kind of leaving it the wild west of the apps that any end user wants to grab. It should be, you can actually do an audit of the apps that are used. There's an Azure AD tool that will go onto desktops and actually audit what cloud apps are logged into on that computer. And then you can kind of take that information to build your solution set for specific to your company.
Right, and that's a good point about those auditing capabilities that admins can have to kind of keep track of, so it doesn't turn into the Wild West like you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, currently it's the Wild West. Go to any business and you'll see them logging into 10 different cloud apps that IT has no awareness of at all.
Right. So we got a question, and this might be a more broad question, but we'll see what we can get to here. So you touched on groups in your demo, and you added yourself to a couple of groups. And we have a question, if there's any chance you can explain where those came from and when would you create a group for these purposes?
So if your organization has multiple people that need access to the same application using the same login, that is a great application for making an Azure AD group for it.
And those are specifically Azure AD groups. They're not from elsewhere in Office 365 that get populated over into Azure?
No, yeah. So those groups live and die in the Azure kind of AD. They don't start appearing elsewhere.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. We had a question, and then I'm thinking myself about groups that I've created and elsewhere. So
yeah, that's right. You don't really want these things appearing all over the place. What is this?
Right. Yeah. What are these
Asks
people
why
in
there's a
this
Skype group. Oh.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Okay. So we got a question. I'm not sure if you have the answer to this, but we'll throw it out there. If you don't, that's okay. Someone asked, how does Azure AD work for Macs?
So the answer is, I apologize for not really touching on this, but this Azure AD works beautifully on any device running basically any OS. So it runs great on Mac OS X, it runs great on an iPad, iPhone, Android, Windows Phone, BlackBerry, you name it. You can either, there are apps specifically built for most of these platforms, and for the ones that aren't, you can hop in through the Office 365 portal to use your apps on anything. Anything that shows a browser.
Great. Well, I shouldn't have assumed that you might not have the answer to that. That's a great answer.
You never know.
And what happens, so let's say Twitter decides that they revoke access, or they don't want their app to be included in Azure AD or in that gallery. Does it just disappear from the portal without really notification?
No. So once Twitter had, Twitter's contract that they signed must have made some sort of clause for perpetuity, because it would only be Microsoft's decision what appears or disappears in that gallery. So Twitter, unless there's some sort of horrible spat, I really don't see them removing apps in that manner. I mean, Microsoft, I'll throw this out there, there are competitors in the single sign-on landscape, and it's in Microsoft's best interest to keep as many apps in there as possible, so they really have to keep app vendors as happy as possible and make this as easy as possible for them.
Right, right. All right, well, it looks like we are wrapping up here. I think we got a bunch of good questions answered, and unless there are any more late coming questions, we can close out here. And I will say for all of you, just to reiterate, I will be sending out the recording, and if you do have questions, you're absolutely welcome to email me at ninja@365ninja.com. If you'd like to reach out to Norman, you can email me, and I can get in touch with him, and we can get you an answer to your question, or tell you where you can get more information. So thanks everybody for your attendance and your attention, and thanks so much, Norman, for your expertise and a great demo and great information, and we will end the webinar here.
Thank you.
All right, thanks very much.